This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 144.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Matt Sing Me a Solo Rogers.
You know, Ken, I can if you really need me to, I guess.
Well, you have a mic in front of you. I'll give you the opportunity if you want to take it.
My best version of Whitney Houston? I don't know. I think I'll pass this time.
So we had a really fun conversation tonight, Matt. We had Bryson on our podcast. He's a music teacher. He's that music teacher, which he is rightfully branded himself. But this conversation, I would say, was about 10% about music and 90% about good teaching.
As we've been really fortunate, a lot of educators that we talk to recognize good teaching practices don't need to be contained by a domain. And that's been the fun part of this podcast, honestly, Ken. The idea of hearing things that we walk into this conversation or sit in on the other side of this conversation and say, all right, so yeah, you obviously are successful and you have done great things for education. Sure. What does that do for me? And then you get to the end of it, you're like, all right, there was a lot there that actually was helpful to me. And I think Bryson continued that fortune of us talking with people that just get education, that pass on priorities of education, that talk about how subject areas are important, but they are not the determining factors of what makes a good educator. So another great episode. Really fortunate for this one.
Yeah, I've been self-promoting and self-branding our podcast as the best conversations in education because I truly, truly believe that. Like you said, Matt, we are so fortunate to have the guests that we've had over 144 shows, and Bryson is just right there with all of them. We have a K through 6 general music teacher on the podcast, and like I said, most of our conversation is around differentiation, inclusion, student relationships, how to be aware of your instruction, pedagogy. There's so much to this conversation, and it just amazes me again that we're over 140 shows into this podcast, and we heard tonight inclusion strategies that we've never talked about on the show. So again, it's just value for our listeners. It's value for you and I, for things to think about in our classroom and ways to adapt our instruction and adapt the classroom environment that we're creating for students to make students as successful as possible. And I'm just very appreciative of Bryson and the time that he gave us and the conversation that developed on this show. So let's hear from Teach Better and then jump right into that conversation with Bryson Tarbett.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Bryson. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Not too bad. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to get into this. We set up this a while ago. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'm excited to learn about you and learn about what you do in education. So kick things off for us. Real simple. Officially introduce yourself and let our audience know what your role and experience in education is.
For sure. So I am a pre-K through 6th grade general music teacher. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I teach just outside of Columbus, Ohio, and I absolutely love it. My passion is inclusion and differentiation. And because of that, and because it's so let's say, not talked about a lot in undergrad preparation for general music. I created a company called That Music Teacher, where we create content specific professional development for other music teachers so that we can kind of build each other up, get off of what we lovingly call music teacher island, where we just feel like, we're the only music teachers in the school, sometimes the only music teacher in the district. So allow us to kind of build this community, and really just kind of help better everyone through a really strong online community.
That's awesome. And I definitely want to learn more about that. I'm curious when your passion for inclusion started. So, as you said, and I think you were kind of alluding to this, it's not talked about much in your preparatory courses in college. I think in general, but I would venture to assume even more so for someone who's focusing in music. So tell us where that passion started from.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the what I'm about to tell you about my experience in undergrad has been echoed with conversations I've had with so many other music teachers, and that is, we were told to differentiate. And that was kind of it. We would ask, like, what does that mean? They're like, well, you just differentiate. It always kind of reminds me of that scenes from Schitt's Creek where Moira's telling him, just fold in, you just fold it
Just
in.
fold the cheese.
And it's like, exactly. And we're like, hey, what does that mean? And we're like, well, you just need to make sure everyone's included. I'm like, oh, well, how? And I'll be honest, I really didn't have any answers in undergrad. I didn't have any answers in student teaching. And I tried my hardest, but what I loved about that, is I ended up doing a gap year where I spent the majority of the year working in the special education world rather than music, as an educational assistant. And I absolutely loved it. I learned so much about inclusion and differentiation by being able to kind of zoom out a little bit and see what happens outside of the music classroom, because we focus so hard on, I'm a music education major, I'm going to be a music teacher. It's really easy to forget that we are part of a school that is so much bigger than we are. As much as I love what I do, and I think that what I do is really important, there's so much other things going on. And that's really where I kind of fell into this passion of making sure that my classroom is a place that everyone can be truly successful. Beyond that, myself, I have ADHD and sensory processing disorder. So I've also dealt with a lot of this as the student, and being able to create a place that I wish that I would have had when I was in school has really helped fill my heart in a way that gets me to, really empowers me and encourages me and energizes me in a way that I think that I can really kind of take it to the next level and kind of shout it from the rooftops whenever I can.
I think it's a great perspective. And Ken, I'm sure you can kind of definitely understand as well this idea of inclusion is one of those things that we as classroom teachers are often tasked with teaching as much, as you said, differentiation as possible. But we see a lot of success in students that are good at traditional learning. And in your position, you are often an outlet, I'm sure. I'm sure you have plenty of times where you'd say, this student from the regular teacher is going to be a problem. Watch out for them. If something happens, just call the office type scenario. And they end up being a safe place, or a place where they excel, because the brilliance of their talents may not be pencil and paper, or it may not be traditional skills. How do you feel like, that, whether that's true or not? And B, how do you feel like you enhance when you see a student really shining where they often don't get the light that they often deserve?
I think you hit the nail right on the head there, where we have students that, especially students that have been struggling academically for years, maybe a fourth grader who's still really struggling to read, they know that they're going to struggle. So they wake up every morning realizing, hey, I'm going to have to work really hard and it won't be good enough, because, I'm still going to be below grade level. Everyone else is still going to be reading better than me. And like, that would take a lot on, that would take a toll on anyone. And what I love about my subject area is that it is so completely different that you could have a kid that has scored high on the tests, they're really good at reading, really good at math, but sometimes they get stuck in, well, what's the right answer? And the reality is, in music, is that there rarely is a right answer. So it allows for everyone to be on kind of a level playing field. One of my favorite things to teach is the recorder, which I know some of you are cringing, but I promise it can be fun, because it's new for everyone. It is most people's first instruments ever. And nobody, when they come into fourth grade, has played the recorder. Everyone is struggling. And I have seen so many students light up because they're at the same level when they haven't been at the same level as their peers in so long, and seeing them take the pride in the learning again. I truly believe that it helps them in more than just learning to play the recorder. It's that character development. It's that, hey, I might have really struggled in the test before here, or, we just did, a benchmark test or whatever, but we are all going to be here. I can see the progress that I made here. And it's such a community thing that it allows students to unlock a different part of themselves in a way that they might not necessarily see in the traditional classroom. And I'll give other teachers a little bit of a little, not necessarily a pass, but like, I am incredibly blessed that I get to see them for 40 minutes. I fully understand that, when you have a kid in your classroom the entire day, it can be really easy for that to be the place that they associate with all of those negative feelings of not being adequate enough, of really struggling, of, everyone else being better than them. And that when they come to me, they're able to get a release, a break from the learning that's going on in that classroom. Obviously, there's still learning going on in my classroom, but I think we can all agree that while they are different, they serve a student in different ways.
I'll actually push back on you a little bit as a former fifth grade teacher where I had my kids all day. It is difficult in what you're saying, but I don't know that I would necessarily give teachers that pass. And I don't think it's fair to allow students to not feel successful all day. Whether you are that self-contained teacher, is it hard? Hell yeah, it's hard to make them feel successful. As a secondary teacher where kids are going to potentially 5 to 8 classes a day, it's like you said earlier, it's so easy to think of yourself in just this bubble of music where like everything is about music, but you do have to remember that you're part of that whole school, that whole district. As a secondary teacher, if a student is coming to you and feeling defeated, there's a good chance that they are feeling defeated every class before you and every class after you. And that's just not fair. And it is part of that differentiation and it's part of that inclusion and just part of getting to know your students and creating different learning opportunities and bringing in kinesthetic instruction or, bringing in music, bringing in art, bringing in different things. And when I speak and when I do some keynotes, something that I talk about is using the phrase "the expert of," finding something your students are the expert of, not only to boost their confidence, but actually to allow you to offload tasks that you don't need to do. And so when my students are working with some sort of technology, and I have a student that is very adequate in using that type of program, I could say, well, go check in with Ryan. He's the expert of blah, blah, blah. And I had a couple teachers at one of the schools I was at ask me afterwards. They were like, I love that idea, but what about the students that, don't get that classification? I said, you have 180 days to figure out what they're the expert of. Find something that they are great at and highlight it and make them feel good about it. And it is a game changer for them. So I just want to say that because yes, I do understand what you're saying, but I also don't think it's fair to just say, oh, well. Go ahead.
I think you're exactly right. I think that you bring up a really good point, which is there are some students that they go from class to class and everyone expects the perfection of them all the time. And it's their way or the highway and the students just along for the ride. And I think you're exactly right. As we, as teachers in general, regardless of what we teach, what period we teach, how many students we have in a class, what age, whatever, we need to make sure that our students want to be there and they feel like they're adding something to the classroom by being there.
Absolutely.
So I love the way that you said that, finding the expert. I might be using that.
Yeah, for sure. Use it. So I'm going to ask you a very simple question. What is differentiation?
Ooh, differentiation is essentially removing the barriers for accessing the curriculum. So it's applying modifications and adaptations, basically doing what you need to do so that the students in front of you can access the curriculum that you're teaching. I think we've all sat in classes. I think undergrad is notoriously bad for this, that the information is all there. The professor has all the information, but they're not presenting it in a way that is allowing all the students to access their curriculum or access it in the best way they could. For me personally, again, I said I have sensory processing disorder. If there's a ticking clock going on, that could be enough to get me out of my focus. If there's a lot of extra sounds, if we're sitting next to the elevator, if God forbid one of my teachers have an air freshener, that would completely set me off. Like, it's those things of, hey, I can make a simple change. All right, scents are too heavy. All right, air freshener is gone. Cool. This student is able to access curriculum. It's the same thing when you're saying, all right, we have Billy is not able to read the board. What can we do to make him read the board or make sure he can read the board? We can get him closer to the board. We could see if we can get his eyes tested. Maybe he needs glasses. Maybe the board, we're using the wrong color marker. Maybe the board is an old chalkboard and we need to update it to a whiteboard. Whatever. These are all different ways to make sure that the students that are actually in front of us are able to access the curriculum that we are trying to allow them to access.
So, how do you feel like differentiation looks from your environment than maybe something of a regular ed teacher? And do you feel like there's enough crossover that you can talk as colleagues, or is it kind of going back to that teacher island scenario that your version of what you need to do as differentiation really is unique and difficult to express?
So I'm going to answer that in a couple different ways. The first way is elementary music teachers tend to have the incredible double-edged sword of being given no curriculum, which is awful because we're developing curriculum for all these different grades all at the same time. But it's also great because we're able to really craft the curriculum and the content and standards to the students we actually have in front of us. We're not using a scripted curriculum that is research thing or whatever. We're able to actually use it on. We're able to understand. All right, I have this set of students. They're really struggling on this concept. They need more of this, less of that. They need it presented in this way, and it allows us so much more flexibility. But I also think that there are just some foundations of good teaching and differentiation that are just completely applicable to no matter where you are. When I was doing my master's, I dove real deep into the concept of universal design for learning, and I love it. I think it is a great research-backed way of talking about how we can remove barriers and ensure access. And one of the biggest things is that UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, is not subject specific. It's not based on the content you teach or the grade level you teach. It is a framework and a way of thinking about the way you teach so that you can remove those barriers.
I think it's an awesome answer. And I think when you pull things like UDL into any learning environment, the whole concept of it is it's good for kids regardless of the environment. Going back,
I just want to hit one thing real quick. I just want to say, show 25, we talked a lot about UDL. So I'll just throw it out there because I love it. It is an absolute great way of thinking about the approach to instruction. Sorry, Matt.
Well, even UDL as the lens of if you're diving into something like a craft that you really need to improve upon, just awareness of things that you think are obvious. We talk about that curse of knowledge so often and in every single field, right? We assume that we taught it, and even we craft a lot of times our exit tickets to decide whether or not they got the information. And sometimes we struggle to recognize obvious barriers in the way of some of our learners. I guess one of the things that I want to go back a little bit and talk about music specifically, because I was looking at your website and I think it's really fascinating that music teachers and art teachers, and you can advocate for the other related arts, but I feel like music teachers, art teachers specifically, have one of the most rigorous preparatory processes through college, because you have to kind of go from a lens of you're going to be professional in that field, and then layer on top of the educational requirements on top of that, which just feels like an absolute bear. I was just trying to get the educational credits, let alone be a subject matter expert in somewhere. So I don't blame you for saying that you missed out on certain things because you had many other things you were required to do. Can you kind of speak to that process of what it looks like to be a related arts preparatory student? And then, as you mentioned, walked into a classroom that, you went from all these things you had to manage to, a blank slate.
So this is one of those soapboxes that I could easily talk about for days because you framed it exactly correct. For better or for worse, especially music education, it tends to be like, for instance, my bachelor's degree is a bachelor of music. It is a music degree. And I'll be honest, it was rough. Like, I was maxed out every semester. It was, I took every semester. I pretty much took ensembles and performing groups that I was required to take, but I got 0 credit for, because I was already taking too many credits. And the reality is most in the United States, at least here, for music, most states tend to license pretty much pre-K through 12, general music, band, choir, orchestra, all together. So obviously, if you're going to try to fit all of those, being a master of all those concepts or all those different tracks in 4 years, with also, it's a liberal arts college, and you're also going to do all the education stuff, and student teaching takes a whole semester out of there, something's going to fall out. And that's really where that music teacher started, is because the elementary level tends to be the one that gets left out, because in college you're doing the ensembles, you're singing in a choir, so it's easy to not easy, but easier to talk about how to be a choir teacher when you're currently in a choir doing that. But so many of us haven't been in an elementary music classroom in years, because we're high school, we just finished high school. I'll be honest, I have a lot of opinions about the way we talk about, pre-service teachers. I think that, I love history, but having to take, 3 music history classes, like, cool, we learned about some monks that sang some things. It's awesome. But, like, how much better would my craft be if I was able to, instead of taking, 4 music theory classes, was able to take a class on differentiation, or a class on special education, or some sort of, I don't know, more pedagogy. It's that constant battle of, do we want knowledge or do we want pedagogy? One of my biggest hills that I'm willing to die on is when people that have many, many years of education experience, they might have a doctorate, they might be, upper administration, they try to tell you how to teach when they don't get your content area. Because there's a difference between being a really good teacher and having that content specific pedagogical content knowledge. And that is where you really get the teachers that are really able to master their craft, because not only do they understand music, they're able to help teach it. They're able to help others experience it and get that information they have in their brain and get it out there in the world.
Can I ask you a question kind of related to that? So, I think you bring up an awesome point of, if I walked in as your advisor giving you guidance on how to teach something that I don't know how to, I mean, I used to be in chorus. I was a dancer in high school. So, like, musical theater was something, but I wasn't, in a position to tell you how to do your role. Can switching from an elementary position where realistically all of the members of an elementary school kind of understand what they're all going through in that regular ed environment, and even special ed too, how do you feel like when you moved into the high school you felt like you had to change tactics because you're supporting people on content you don't know about? You're just depending on pedagogy and teaching skill. How did you feel like you brought that into your coaching? Because you have to kind of respect, Bryson, like kind of what you're saying, like you have to respect you as a master of your craft, but still provide support and feedback and guidance as a coach or an admin, advisor, etc.
So just to give you some background on that, Bryson, I now am a secondary instructional coach. So I'm only working with our middle school and high school teachers. So to answer that question, Matt, I think you do have to respect that. And I've been in positions where I am supporting high school art teachers. I am supporting high school calculus teachers and things that I kind of know or I don't know at all. The art being that piece. And I think as in my position, if I'm there to actually assist with instruction, I'm not there to solve small problems. I focus on student outcomes. I'm observing student outcomes. What am I observing with the students? How many students are on task? How many students are engaged? How many students are following along? I can think of a class where I was helping out a newer teacher, and they were doing guided notes. And I have my own opinions about guided notes, but I didn't even present that. All I presented was that it was geometry was involved, and I simply noted that like 4 out of the 24 students drew the diagram that correlated with the notes, right? Without the diagram, the notes were completely useless. So it's looking at those things that teachers may not be able to observe while they're in their teaching, and then presenting different strategies for overcoming that, whether that's guided notes, whether that's using some manipulatives as an introduction before that. So it's bringing in different instructional ideas, but doing it from a lens of respecting that expertise, but also to say that, you might, there are other ways to approach instruction that maybe you haven't thought of because one, you haven't been exposed, or two, like you're saying, Bryson, all of your training has been to be the expert, to be the smartest person in the room, not to focus on pedagogy.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I think that, I've had many administrators over the years, and the administrators that make me feel the most supported are the ones that ask questions. That when they walk by my room, one, they're walking by my room, and two, they're trying to get at the core, because especially at the elementary level, kind of across the board, but especially in the arts, it's sometimes tricky to figure out what we're actually working on, because it's kind of like hidden learning, like that experiential learning. And what I love about the administrators that I've had is that's like, all right, I know that you're doing so much in your classroom. Can you talk a little bit about how you're taking information in and using that to guide your instruction, rather than just failing me on an evaluation because they don't see me doing a test or something? They're able to have that conversation. And I think that's something that we also, as educators in fields that we're being observed, and we have people that are stakeholders that are not the content area, is to advocate it for in a way that is understanding of the fact that we might be really good teachers, but that doesn't mean we can't get better. That doesn't mean that, like I said, like what I learned outside of the music classroom has made me such a better music teacher, because I was able to see things from a different point of view. So when we're allowed to have that communication and just like respect each other, and like, that is when I feel the most supported. And in my opinion, that's when my teaching just gets so much better, is when we're able to have that dialogue.
Yeah, and I think that going off those questions, it's discovering the intention of the instruction. What is the learning objective that you're trying to accomplish? What is the intention in the way that you're presenting the material, or creating an experience for students to feel, experience, discover, learn the material? And teachers should be able to explain that intention, and then that's where you have opportunity for ideas, right? Presenting ideas. And I don't know anything about music. I never did instruments. I did a little bit of course when I had to in middle school. So that would be an area where I agree, Bryson. I'd be going with a lot of questions for how to support. And even just the simple thing of observing what the students are doing, not even focusing on the teaching, but observing what the students are doing and presenting that data to the teacher, for the teacher to be able to reflect, to say, wow, I really would want, double the amount of students to be doing XYZ. I didn't realize that only a few were doing it, or those different concepts there. So I do think that's important, Matt. And I think it is a challenge. And, so what I would be curious to ask you, Bryson, is specifically with inclusion, can you highlight where you think there's a specific strategy you use in a music class that is more important or more valuable in a music class specifically, and just kind of share why you think that?
I'm not sure if it's necessarily more important in a music class, but it can be more important. I think the biggest change that I've implemented in my teaching that has allowed my classroom management to be better, my student involvement, the engagement, their sense of community, their sense of belonging, is being aware of my sense of the sensory inputs in my classroom. I mean, again, I have SPD, so like I get it. But the reality is, in my classroom, I'm incredibly blessed that I have these wonderful windows. So if I have all these fluorescent lights on, I already have all this wonderful light. So I turn off half of my lights, so there's less sensory input. Music classroom tends to be loud. I have over the ear headphones. I think I have like 10 or 15 pairs. So basically anyone that wants them can go up and grab one. It's not, oh, well, this kid can get one because he sometimes struggles with sensory issues. It's something that anyone can access. And that has shown the greatest improvement in my classroom by just putting these small changes in and doing it in a way that anyone can access them, having fidgets involved, allowing a student to stand if they want to stand rather than sitting down when we're doing an activity on the rug or whatever. Like, just being aware of what's worth fighting over and what's not. If it comes down to a student sitting or standing, if they're doing what they're supposed to do and not bothering other people, who cares? And that is really where I think, especially in a sensory heavy classroom like a music classroom, those sensory friendly shifts can really make an absolutely massive difference.
Can I ask a really tough question? All right. So I hear that, and I hear what my new teachers in my building would say, which is, what parameters are you putting on there? Because what you're saying is, I mean, we all get is kind of loosey goosey, but it still can't be just loosey goosey. Those are internal discussions you're having, saying this is worth it or this is not worth it. But when doing certain things like being transparent about your own learning and your own sensory, at what point are you bringing that into the conversation with your kids? Is that a kindergarten? Is that a third grade? And then when you have some of this UDL or the fidgets or those type items, how are you teaching your learners to respect them for good instead of using them for distraction further?
And so, Matt, you're kind of like hitting on the classroom management piece with the
Totally.
loosey-goosey reference. Yeah, that was a good. All right.
Yeah, I mean, like, how do you, that is a question I hear all the time, which is, all right, I have all these fidgets. How do I make it not run my classroom?
Yeah.
How do I actually make it helpful rather than crazy?
Yep.
And the reality is it's going to be a little chaotic at the beginning. And I think that we as teachers, sometimes we need to be a little bit more okay with chaos. I know we definitely have, like, type A versus type B teachers going on, but the way that I see it is I implement things slowly in a way that has a purpose. So for instance, with the headphones, I have them out and available. And if I notice, especially, in kindergarten, if I notice a student that's like covering their ears when we're doing something, I might offer that. And then, yes, everyone else might want one. And okay, they get headphones for that day. But if they start using the headphones or the fidgets or doing whatever in a way that is distracting themselves or others, I will give them one warning. And then that is it. They put it back. And eventually they get it. It is a little bit of a thing. I try to implement things slowly in kindergarten, but by the time they get to first grade, second grade onward, they understand it. They've been doing it. They might need reminded of the expectations. But I'm really firm. Again, I'll give them one warning and then they're done. If they're throwing something, my students know if they're being unsafe to themselves or others, that's kind of the big thing right there. And what I love about that is, yes, it's a little bit chaotic at the beginning, but as the novelty begins to wear off, the students that are able to receive benefit from those strategies are able to do so in a way that they are not othered at all, because it is available to everyone. It has always been available to everyone, and they are just choosing to continue to use it. And I think that is a way where I think that's what we should strive for.
I love that. I love that piece of making it available to everyone. I think that's so important for so many reasons, because it doesn't single out those students like you're speaking to, but it also allows others to realize that there are ways to make them feel more comfortable, more safe, more successful in a classroom. And if I could jump in on that question too, Matt, and then I know you had something you wanted to say. It's like you just said, Bryson. It's strong expectations. It's firm expectations. You can have a classroom that has potentially more just quote unquote distractions, right? But it's strong expectations and it's explicit intention. You know, when I instituted flexible seating in my classroom, the kids did not have desks and they did not have assigned seats for the entire year. And they created the classroom with me the first week. And we set up rules together. We set up expectations together. We talked about what would make them feel welcome, what would not make them feel welcomed, and that was we made a big poster that we hung in the room and I would reference at times. But I had one very simple rule: if there was an argument over a seat or a chair or a spot in the classroom, and I got involved, then I was deciding your seat for a week. And I got involved, I think, once over the course of 3 years. And they learned to solve it on their own. Now I'm there. I'm listening. I'm being aware of conversations or aware of students maybe having I think argument is even too strong a word, but a conversation about that. And I pay attention. Like, I make sure that there's not a quieter student that's constantly giving in and never, and those are all part of those conversations, but it's clear, firm expectations. And I think it's super important. And you alluded to this, be explicit with the students. Here's why you can use these headphones. Here's why they're helpful. Here's why we have these fidgets. They understand the reasons so that they understand the expectations.
You bring up a really good point, which is the idea of problem solving and the fact that we don't necessarily need to be involved in everything. Like you said, yes, we need to be aware. We need to make sure that what's going on is like okay to go on. But there are so many things as teachers that we have to be involved in, that when we're able to find something and not kind of remove us from it, that is what is really important. It can really make our lives easier, but our students also allow them to do to learn problem solving. For instance, with my fidgets and headphones and things, I don't get involved. If I have to get involved, it's going away, basically. And it's one of those things where, in my classrooms, I don't have assigned seats unless we accidentally, absolutely need to. I mean, the way that I teach, we're moving around anyway as it is. So it's the same thing. Like, students will come in and they'll try to get the blue dot, and I'm like, I am not going to get involved in this. We need to solve the problem, and usually the problem gets solved. And if it isn't, then I'll step in. But we need to teach our students how to be problem solvers too.
How do you find? Because I think you can take this two routes. You can either take it you with your colleagues or you with fellow peers in a similar position. How do you feel like you manage either of those relationships? Because I'll use the peers scenario first. It's really difficult when you are possibly a single in a building or single in a potentially district. Like, our music teacher is one music teacher for the entire elementary. So that is a huge responsibility. And so in that realm, you're setting a huge amount of, you have a big responsibility for a large number of students and their love of your subject area. How do you, using that peers, how do you develop a trustworthy scenario with others, specifically when people may not understand exactly the scenario you're in, if that makes sense?
Well, first of all, I want to touch on the fact of, we're in charge of making sure kids love music. And the reality is a lot of students won't do music after elementary. So we better give them something to like. But beyond that is, I think, kind of going what we were talking about earlier, is what are those student outcomes? Show what's going on in your classroom. Show that your students are loving it and that are engaging, and you have students that have been really shy, that are coming out of their shell, and that they're able to do this, that, and the other thing, and why that's important and how it fits together and how that leads to these different skills that we're trying to get in our students. Because whether we like it or not, we are a cornerstone of the school, because we see most likely all of the students, whether we like it or not. What happens in our classrooms helps set the tone of the rest of the school. So it's really important for us to advocate for what's going on in our classroom, but also just share what's going on and get outside of our classroom so that we know what's going on in the rest of the school too, so that we can be, again, whether we like it or not, we as the music teacher tend to be kind of one of the pillars of the school, one of the people that students know for multiple years, and kind of take on this role of constant throughout the years. And I think it's a lot, but I absolutely love it. And I think that's something that so many other teachers really kind of get behind too.
Adding to that, your like named positions, possibly outside of a district, how do you continue? And obviously, you felt like there was slightly a void in this area of, let's have a conversation of people that are on an island. How do you manage, or what was your experience with other music teachers that you felt like there needed to close that gap and create a community? Because I would imagine, as you mentioned, a teacher coming out of college and going right into a position, as you mentioned, without a curriculum, boy, oh boy, is that daunting. Where does that community come from? Was it organic, or how much work did you have to put in to really drive up that shared resource?
I think that the need has always been there because, just like you said, we're dropping people in completely unprepared, and not only are we telling them to develop a curriculum kindergarten through sixth grade, but we're also have to differentiate it. And as we said before, nobody knows what that is at that point. So what I found is, you know. I'll be honest, my business started completely by accident. I created an Instagram account when I was in my gap year because I wanted to live vicariously through other music teachers, and it just kind of spiraled. As we've grown and as we've come up with more offerings. This past summer we hosted the second Elementary Music Summit, which is a free online conference for elementary music teachers. And so far over the past 2 years, we've welcomed almost 6,000 people online to this conference because there's such a need for that content specific professional development. There are teachers out there that are trying to better their craft, that are trying to increase the outcomes in their classrooms, that are just struggling. They're getting stonewalled by their districts. Their state might have a conference every year for their OMEA or whatever conference, but their district might not pay for it. I have a friend who their district won't give her a day off, and they expect her to pay for it, and they expect her to get her own sub. How is that helping teachers in any content area better their craft? And that's where I think there is a need for such community, and there are people that are wanting to be part of it. It's just that the physical distance and the perceived distance of others that can get in the way sometimes.
Well, and even adding to the fact that you're leaving, and a lot of people look at you as already experts, right? Like our art teachers could leave the classroom and potentially be professional artists. They've put enough work in that could be a reality. You could leave and most likely have skills that you could be a performing musician, whatever that level is. And I know many times, I don't know what it is, you guys have the stamina to do music outside of your 9 to 5 as well. A lot of music teachers I know are also performers, or they're managing band, or they're doing all the extracurriculars, and it's just expected. And that's incredible. So it pains me to hear how difficult hurdles are for such a valuable resource. But when there's one of you and there's 17 regular ed teachers and 5 special ed teachers, and it's unfortunate to say, hey, we're going to prioritize. But in reality, I think what you say needs to be echoed. The music teacher, the art teacher, the STEM teacher, the phys ed teacher ends up being the cornerstone of the school in so many ways, and probably has the best perspective of growth of students throughout their journey through elementary.
Yeah, I think it is getting better with districts overall. But one of the things that I give my administration so much credit for is there have been times where the district provided PD wasn't really going to help me at all. Like, yes, they could have required me to go to that meeting and give me a CEU for it, which happens all the time in districts all over the country. But my administration was like, hey, if you present your own opportunity, like I've gone and observed other teachers. I mean, when was the last time you observed someone to teach after college? It's been a minute, right? I went and I've observed other teachers. I've been able to dig into the archives of a national organizations conference and be able to find all these wonderful resources that are content specific. And that is where, if there's any administrators listening, please, if there is a PD that is not relevant to your teacher and they have some other way to get the PD that is relevant, please let them do it. It doesn't matter if they're in a room full of other people. No one cares what it looks like to be PD. We should focus on what they're actually getting out of it. Don't worry about what it's going to look like if we take a picture for Twitter. What is actually the outcome of the professional development?
You mean differentiate?
Exactly, right? It all comes back to this, which comes back to the perfect point of what is good for one student is good for any student, regardless of the age.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you one more question related to music specifically, and I think it's going to be a little bit harder for you to answer because I'm just going to make the assumption that students love being in your classroom, but as you progress maybe towards the older grades or any age level, you have students that are forced to take your class that might not be interested in music. So what do you do to elevate their interest in it, or at least see purpose in what they're doing, even if they're not interested in music specifically?
That is a real good question. And the frustrating answer is get them young, and it's so much easier after that. Mm-hmm. Like my first year kindergartners are in like 6th grade now, and they're easy. I'll take this, because they've been with me. They understand it. I've been able to kind of draw closely, draw them step by step. But what's really interesting about my position is I teach at a K-4 school that has about 1/3 of the population in my district. And then I go to a 5-6 school where all those kids come together. So I'm kind of my own feeder program. So I have kids that don't know me. They don't necessarily trust me yet, and I have to get them interested in music, because just like you said, there are some kids that just don't want to do it. There are some kids that don't want to sing. And what I have found the most helpful is I get up there and I be a big old goofball and let them know that, hey, I'm going to be a weirdo. I would love for you to join me being a weirdo. Singing isn't this weird thing that only certain people do. It's not something that only girls do. It's just an innately human thing. But on a more concrete side, get them involved. Don't just do what you want to do. What can we do to bring the music that is happening outside of their classroom, bringing it into your classroom? And that is where we're able to really make those connections. One thing during COVID is that for the longest time, for years on end, we couldn't sing. And I'm a vocal music teacher, so I was at a loss of what to do. And one unexpected gem that came out of teaching during COVID is I had to, because I had no other option, find other ways to be musical. And what I noticed is students that I thought just hated music and maybe weren't musical, I just wasn't setting them up for success. They might have been really, good at musical responses and creating these and listening to music and understanding it in a way that isn't necessarily performance, but it's still innately musical. And through that experience, I've learned so many different ways to bring all types of musicality into my classroom, because it's a general music classroom. It's not a performancing music classroom. It's so much more than that.
I love that. And I think the work that you do can, we've done almost 150 episodes, and I'd like to think of so many of our guests are Teacher of the Year candidates from different states across the country. And so many of them have been related art teachers, even though the grand majority would be regular ed teachers, then special ed teachers, and then the related arts teachers. That it's just fantastic to see specialists in their field really completely get it. And it was just something that, as you were talking about differentiating PD and letting us kind of do our thing, and if there's a need for development, we want to do our craft the best possible. Just let us kind of do it, is a message that there's a lot of related arts teachers that are doing justice by that. And I think that was just something that I was thinking about. For every 10 episodes, it feels like we have two music teachers, one art teacher. We've had many phys ed teachers. We've had so many representatives from unique roles in education that is beyond just here's my scripted curriculum, here are my state standards, this is what I have to do, and we're going to throw PBL into it. So just kudos to that.
Thank you. And I have to say, one of my mentors, Franklin Willis, he talks a lot about being more than a music teacher, because yes, I am a music teacher, but there's so much more than who I am, as well as what I do in the school, that it's not just music. There's so much more that goes on. And I think you touched a lot on that point.
I just finished editing about a week ago. We just released a episode with a phys ed teacher, and he said almost just the exact same thing, of something along the lines of, if the students just view me as a gym teacher, then I miss the mark, right? There's so much more that you do for a school. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. For timing purposes, respecting your time and our listeners, I want to jump into our exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Listen. Whether that be listening to their opinions, listening to how they feel, validating their concerns, just listen.
I love it.
I think it's simple, and it's so important.
So what is the best piece of advice you may have received? And it could have come from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
So in my freshman year of undergrad, one of the assignments that we had to do for an intro to music ed class was interview a former teacher. And I interviewed Sandy Miller, who was the assistant choir director in my high school. And she had a lot of what we call Millerisms, just interesting turns of phrase. And she looked at me, she goes, "Bryson, it's time for you to put on your big girl panties and work." And because it's rough, there are going to be times where, it's going to be really rough. You're going to have to work really hard, but it's so worth it when you get past it.
I love that. So talking about getting past things, we all recognize that the school year goes in waves. We're recording this towards the beginning of the school year, which can be, either an easy or a tough time of year. I would imagine preparing for performance brings a little extra stress. What is something you feel like an educator who's listening needs to hear to help them power up through those moments of struggle?
And feel free to tell them all to put their big girl panties on.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, do the Millerism, put your big girl panties on, work. But in all reality, you can't do 100% of everything all the time. Like you said, when I'm preparing for a performance, it gets stressful, but I decide it's not balance of time altogether. It's all right. If I'm in the middle of a performance week and I have to stay late multiple times a week, all right, I'm probably not going to cook that week. All right, maybe that's the week I get a frozen meal, or maybe that's the week I get HelloFresh or something. Like, you can't be everything all at once 100%. You will burn out if you do that. So understand that just like the year has ebb and flows, who you are as a person and what your roles and your responsibilities are should also change with those waves.
That's a really good way to put it. And just looking at the entire balance, and giving yourself out in some way. If it's not stressful at school, then maybe you're eating a little bit healthier that week, or you're cooking a little bit more. During our teacher in-service week, I just got absolutely slammed this year. And I came home and told my wife, I said, I don't want to cook a thing. Even if you started to, I don't want to clean up a single dish. We're going out. And, it's just what we all needed at that time. So it's easy for teachers to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates the teachers, and who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
I think it comes back to my answer of listening. Being aware of when what's worked for years stops working, when what you're, another wonderful music teacher out there, Anne Molesky, she always talks about how education is situational time bound and ever changing. And I think that's the reality. What you work, what I did my first year of teaching, it won't work anymore, because the world is a completely different world. Let's be honest. And if we try to force it to stay in that box, nobody's going to enjoy it. So when you're listening, that's going to allow you to realize the need for a change.
This conversation's been awesome. I think I can speak for Ken and say that we could extend this and put part 2 and part 3 together. But regardless of if we are from the background of music, if our audience wants to follow along with you, what is the best way they can continue learning through you in this educational journey?
The best place to reach out to me is over on Instagram at That Music Teacher. I also have a podcast that actually tomorrow we're going to be launching, as we're recording this tomorrow, we're going to be launching season 5, That Music Podcast for elementary music teachers. I love having conversations with teachers of all areas, so feel free to reach out.
Excellent. We will link up to your website, your Instagram, as well as your podcast on our show notes, which can be found wherever you're watching or listening. Just scroll all the way down, or on our website at powereduup.com. So Bryson, thank you so much. I've had a blast. Your kids are clearly extremely lucky to have you in their kindergarten through 6th grade experience. So just keep on doing what you're doing, and thank you for what you're doing to support teachers as well, especially the ones specifically in your music tribe. So thank you again for your time. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
All right, as we power down this episode, without a doubt, you've left us feeling powered up. Thank you for your time. For our audience, we look forward to talking to you next week. See you then.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.